Hi again, Mark here from TalkingBass.net. This week I've got the second in this short series of lessons devoted to learning your scales in position through the cycle of fourths. If you need any help on any of the topics mentioned here, check out that first lesson which you can find in the info below. So the exercise in the last lesson involved playing the major scale through the cycle of fourths in this low position from the 1st to the 6th fret. We played from the lowest root note that we could find, up as high as we could in that position, and then down as low as possible before working our way back up to the root note again. So for a C major scale as example, we would find the lowest root note there, there's that C, work up as high as we can in that position, then we work down as low as we could go, down to that low E, and then we work our way back up to the C. So that's all of the notes of C major in that first position, and then we just work through the cycle of fourths. So then we play the same thing on the F major, B flat major, E flat major, etc. In this lesson, we're going to try exactly the same exercise, working the major scale through the cycle, but this time we won't be starting and ending on the root notes. We're just going to start as low as we can in that position and then go as high as we can in that position and back. So for the previous C major scale exercise, instead of starting on that C there, we're going to start on the open E because that's the lowest note that we can find in that position. So we play open E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's as high as we can go in that position, and then just back down. Okay, so it's just all of the notes of C major in that first position from the lowest note to the highest note, and then we just play through the cycle of fourths. So then we play the same thing for the F major, B flat major, etc. So now I'll just play through the complete exercise and then I'll give you some tips on learning it afterwards. So we begin with C major. So F major, B flat major, E flat major, A flat major, D flat major, G flat major, now up to B major, E major, A major, D major, G major, and finally back to C. Okay? So first of all, let's have a look at this exercise from a fingerboard shape perspective, because I know a lot of you out there are going to be pattern players. So the first tip that I'd have for you is to look at each individual string separately. So see the pattern on each string. And what you'll find with pretty much most scale patterns is that they fall into one of three patterns. So let's have a look at the C major scale as an example. If we work up through it from the open E, on that E string there, if we ignore the open E for now, we've got the F, the G, and the A, okay? That little pattern there. So that's a whole step pattern. We've got the F to the G, that's a whole step, and then a G to the A, another whole step. So whole step, okay? So that's the first pattern. You'll find that a lot in, like I say, in lots of different scale patterns. Then let's move on to the A string. So we have B, C, D. So this is a half step, whole step pattern. Okay, B to C is a half step, C to D is a whole step. Get used to seeing that little shape there. Then we move to the D string. E, F, G, and you can see there, once again, we've got that half step, whole step pattern, just like we did on the A string. B, C, D, E, F, G, it's the exact same pattern. Then we move up onto the G string, we have A, B, C. So this is a whole step, half step pattern. A to B is a whole step, B to C is a half step. Okay, so they're the three patterns. We've got whole step, there. Then we've got the half step, whole step. And then we've got the whole step, half step. Okay, so those three patterns are really, really important for you to see. And like I say, whenever you're learning any type of scale patterns at all, or even bass lines, melodies, whatever it is, you'll see these patterns time and time again. And when you learn these as, you know, just as an individual pattern that you can just log up there in the toolbox, it's a lot easier for memorizing things because you've got that pattern logged in there and you just think, oh, that's that pattern. Okay, so they're the three patterns to get down first of all. So once you're familiar with those three shapes, you can start to learn all of those scales in this exercise as combinations of 4 patterns, one for each string. So for the C major scale again, we had whole step, then on the A string, we had half step, whole step, D string, half step, whole step, and then on the G string, whole step, half step. So we've just learned it, there's 4 individual patterns there. One extra thing to remember for this C major scale is the use of the open E there. As I mentioned in the previous lesson, I'm not using the open A, D or G strings. I'm only using the open E string because it's the only place that that's available. The open A, D and G string I would class as being a separate kind of position shift, just as we would if we were moving up. So just for this exercise, we don't use the open A, D or G strings. But we're using the open E. So we just need to add that in there. And the thing to remember with all of these scales as you work through the exercises is just try to remember whether you have an E in there. It's not there in that many of the flat keys, but it's there in pretty much all of the sharp keys. So for instance, C major, you've got those finger patterns down on the fretboard. We just add that open E into the mix. Okay? Now, obviously, learning scales in this way, you know, it helps to get it under your fingers by learning them as patterns, but in terms of application and the kind of functional side of scales, it doesn't really do you much good in that sense. So once you've got them under your fingers, you also want to know what all of these notes are in relation to the root note. You want to know them as scale degrees. You need to know that that open E, if we're in C, is the 3rd. You need to know that that G is the 5th. You need to know that that F is the 4th, D is the 2nd, all of that. So that's something that you also need to work on. But to begin with, the most important thing to memorize when you're learning these patterns is where the root note is. That's key. We've already looked at that, you know, in the previous lesson. You know, we started on the root note, went up and down, and that's why I did that. Just so that you get used to seeing the root note in there. Because, you know, if you don't know where the root note is in a scale, then you really shouldn't be playing it. So when we play that C major, we might be starting on the E, working up, but you've got to know that that C there, that's the main point of resolution. That's the tonic. So we've got the C there, and we've got the C there up at the top. So you always need to see that in there. So now let's have a look at the F major scale. So we'll look at the notes on the fretboard first, and then we'll add that open E in there. So we begin with the F there, and we have a whole step pattern. Then we move on to the A string, B flat C D, and we have the whole step pattern again. Then on the D string, we've got the half step, whole step, and then on the G string we've got the half step, whole step again. So it's whole step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. So again, this is just in terms of learning the fingerboard patterns. And the root note is there obviously for the F, and we've got the F there. So you've got those 4 individual patterns, and what will happen eventually is that you'll, instead of just seeing them as individual, you know, patterns on each string, you'll start to see the scale as a whole. Okay, so that will happen in time. You just need to keep playing them. So also take note of what the notes are as you're working through. Even if you're not a note player and you're more of a pattern player, as you're working up, take note of what notes you've got in there. I mean, I've done lessons on spelling drills as well, you know, where we work through each scale, you know, by note. And, you know, a lot of you probably, well, some of you probably already do that. But you know, if you're just a pattern player alone, it always pays to know what those notes are. You know, for me, I know the notes of all the scales that I'm going to be playing, but I do play by pattern as well. So I see it from both sides. So, you know, when you start off, think F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, you know, see those notes under your fingers as you're playing the pattern. You know, even if you're just playing from a pattern perspective, as long as you're sort of keeping the notes, you know, if you're seeing the notes as you're working up through it, it'll start to work for you in that way. So, that's the F major scale, but we also want the open E in there. So we begin there. So the complete pattern, we have open E, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G, A, B flat, C, and then all the way back down. So for the F major scale, we only had one flat, the B flat. So when we move on to the next scale in the cycle, the B flat major, we're going to have the B flat in there, but we're also going to have an E flat, okay? So that means that when we start at the bottom there, we can't use the open E because there's no E in B flat major. So we begin on the F. So let's have a look at the pattern there. So we've got F, G, A. So that's, once again, just like the F major, we've got whole step, whole step. Then we move on to the A string and we have B flat, C, D. So that's whole step again. So that's all exactly the same as we had with the F major. But then when we move on to the D string, we have E flat, F, G. So that's another whole step pattern. Okay? So, okay. Then when we get up onto the top, onto the G string, we have A, B flat, C. Okay? So the whole pattern, no open E. Okay, so just like the F major, but we had that E flat in there, giving us that whole step pattern on the D string. And you can see now how learning those three patterns, the whole step, half step, whole step, and half step, whole step, how learning those three patterns, you start to see these scales in a different way. You start to see that, oh yeah, that's that, you know, that whole step pattern again. For the B flat major scale, we've got three whole step patterns as we work across. There. Okay, so if you're a pattern-based player, this can be really, really useful to you. For the E flat major scale, we bring the A flat into play. So we have the B flat, an E flat, and an A flat. So once again, we don't have an open E, so we begin on the F. So we have F, G, A flat. So we've got a whole step, half step pattern there, starting on an F. Then when we move on to the A string, we have whole step, so B flat, C, D, and then we just have whole step again on the D and the G string. So E flat, F, G, A flat, B, C. So it's a whole step, half step pattern on the E string, and then whole step on the remaining strings. Okay? So rather than work through every single scale, I've written them all out in the lesson material, so just follow the link in the info below. And instead of working through them all in one go, try learning one, like the C major scale, then add the next one, you know, the F major, and then just practice those together. So go between C major and F major. Then add another. So then, you know, bring in the B flat major. So play C, F major, B flat, and then just add one at a time, okay? So that's a much easier way of learning them rather than just trying to memorize all of these scale patterns all at the same time. One thing you'll notice when you get through to the sharp bass keys, so from B major onwards, is that we use the open E string on all of them. The only one of those that we would have used, an E sharp in would have been the F sharp major scale, but we're not using that in this exercise because we're actually using the G flat major scale, the enharmonic equivalent of that. So B major, E major, A major, D major, G major, and C major, all of those feature the open E string. And that's quite a useful thing to know because it means that you know which keys, which scales feature that open E string. So if you were to say, is there an E in the key of, B, you know there is one in there because you've got it in there, okay? The other way to learn these scales is by note name, and even if you do learn them by pattern, as I mentioned before, it's also worth working through them by note too. And to do this, you simply have to know which notes should be flattened or sharpened and then work through each note in turn, sharpening or flattening where necessary. So if we use the C major as our example, when we work up through each note in turn from the open E, we know there's no sharps or flats. So we simply work up one note at a time. E, F, G, A, B, watching the notes as we go, C, D, E, F, G, etc. Okay, so we work through them all alphabetically in turn. Then, if we move to the F major, we know that there's a B flat in there. So if we work up through it, E, F, G, A, B, we know that's going to be a B flat, so we flatten it, then C, D, E, F, G, etc. Now I know that sounds really, really obvious to some of you, but it's, it's amazing if you ask somebody to do this, they don't really think to just start working through it alphabetically. It's a case of what's the next note, what's the next note. Just think of the alphabet and just work through it like that, and then just flatten or sharpen them where necessary. So once again, I'll work through the complete exercise from beginning to end, and because I've given you a few tips on how to memorize these patterns, it might not seem a steep a mountain to climb. So we'll begin with C major. F major. B flat major. E flat major. A flat major. D flat major. G flat major. B major. E major. A major. D major. G major. And back to C major. Okay, so visit talkingbase.net and download the PDF lesson material for this video. While you're at Talking Base, remember you can find every video release on the lesson map all there in a categorized order to help with ease of navigation. Also, subscribe to the free membership to gain access to loads of cool free goodies like the Scale Reference Guide, the practice room and the forum. Okay, I'll see you later.